was a time when frustration simmered like a pot about to boil over. The colonists, once proud subjects of the British Crown, found themselves burdened by taxes they'd never agreed to, from the infamous Stamp Act of 1765 to the punishing Townshend Acts 2 years later. Each new law tightened Britain's hold, pushing the colonies closer to open rebellion. The Tea Act of 1773 became the last straw for many, leading to acts of defiance like the Boston Tea Party. With every unfair policy, a powerful rallying cry echoed across the 13 colonies: no taxation without representation. For the colonists, this wasn't just a slogan. It was a stand for justice, a demand to be heard. As tensions rose, so did the call for unity. The First Continental Congress in 1774 marked a turning point, a moment when delegates from distant colonies came together, realizing that their struggles were not isolated but shared. This sense of purpose and shared identity grew stronger, binding the colonies in a common cause. Gone were the days of acting alone. The colonies would move forward with a single voice, and from that unity would come a statement that would echo through history. The Declaration of Independence was more than words on parchment. It was a bold declaration of values, a vision for a new nation that would stand for liberty and self-determination. It wasn't just about breaking away from Britain, but about laying down principles that would guide a fledgling nation for generations. Welcome to ASMR History, where I breathe life into the stories of our past. Today, in episode 2 of my 6-part series on the American Revolutionary War, I'll journey to the dawn of American independence to explore the dreams, tensions, and voices that shaped a new nation. But before we reach that iconic declaration, let us delve into the formation of the Second Continental Congress, an assembly that would gather with a mission that changed history. The spring of 1775 brought a mix of urgency and uncertainty to the American colonies. The recent battles at Lexington and Concord had escalated tensions to new heights, shattering any illusion that peace would be easily maintained. Less than a month after the bloodshed, representatives from all 13 colonies travelled to Philadelphia, aware that their decisions could alter the course of history. This was the Second Continental Congress, an assembly that had initially been a cautious advisory body, but was now, by necessity, transforming into a provisional government. As they gathered within the walls of the Pennsylvania State House, the delegates carried the weight of their constituents' hopes and fears. Each colony's representatives arrived with a unique perspective, reflecting the distinct social, economic, and political concerns of their home states. Together, they faced the monumental challenge of devising a strategy to navigate the crisis, coordinate resources, and confront the unresolved question of their future relationship with Britain. The Congress was anything but a unified body. Rather, it was a patchwork of differing philosophies, ambitions, and loyalties. Some delegates, like John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, were ardent supporters of reconciliation with Britain. Dickinson, a devastating consequences of a break with Britain. Dickinson's caution was not unfounded. He knew well that the colonies were vastly under-resourced, lacking the army, navy and funds to wage a prolonged conflict against one of the world's most formidable empires. For him, peace was the more prudent course, a chance to avoid untold bloodshed and hardship. To pursue this diplomatic route, Dickinson and like-minded delegates proposed sending an appeal directly to King George III, a last-ditch effort to mend the fraying bonds between the colonies and their mother country. This appeal took the form of the Olive Branch Petition, a document meant to convey the colony's loyalty to the Crown, while expressing grievances over recent British policies. Drafted with care, the petition sought to strike a balance, acknowledging the authority of the king while pleading for a repeal of oppressive measures. In July 1775, the Congress formally submitted the Olive Branch Petition, hoping it might find a sympathetic audience across the Atlantic. The petition read, "We have not raised armies with ambitious designs of separating from Great Britain, underscoring a genuine desire for peace and unity rather than rebellion." It was a humble and hopeful plea, expressing respect for the monarchy and a deep-rooted desire to avoid further bloodshed. In truth, the Olive Branch Petition was as much a reflection of the internal divisions within Congress as it was a message to the king. Dickinson and others saw the petition as a final attempt to steer the colonies away from war, a diplomatic last resort to halt the march toward irreversible conflict. Yet, not all members of Congress shared Dickinson's optimism. Figures like John Adams, a fervent advocate of independence from Massachusetts, regarded the petition as futile, suspecting that the British government would never be willing to grant the colonies the autonomy they desired. For Adams, and those who shared his views, the time had come to abandon hope of reconciliation and to face the reality of a fight for freedom. The contrasting perspectives within Congress highlighted the complexity of the colonial response to British rule and foreshadowed the profound struggles that would shape the birth of the United States. As they awaited the King's response, Congress continued to prepare for the worst, establishing the Continental Army and appointing George Washington as its commander-in-chief. They understood that if the Olive Branch Petition was rejected, the colonies would have no choice but to defend themselves against an empire that now saw them as rebellious subjects. The Olive Branch Petition, hopeful as it was a tenuous thread, and its rejection by King George III would soon close the door on any remaining hope of peace. With the signing of the petition, Congress's message was clear. They had not sought this conflict, but if pushed, they would stand united. On the other side of the debate stood men like John Adams, who believed that the time for reconciliation had irrevocably passed. Adams, ever forthright in his opinions, saw the British Crown's actions not as misunderstandings to be smoothed over, but as deliberate measures to tighten control over the colonies. He was blunt in his conviction that the colonies could no longer afford to trust Britain's intentions sentiment that historian David McCullough would later echo in his reflections on Adams's unwavering stance. Adams's position was not motivated by a reckless thirst for conflict or a desire for disorder. Instead, it stemmed from a profound belief in the principle of self-determination. Adams saw the revolution not merely as a political struggle, but as a moral one. To him, the colonies deserved the chance to determine their own destinies, to build a society based on principles they chose, free from what he saw as the increasingly tyrannical hand of British rule. He argued that dependence on Britain would ultimately strip the colonies of their freedom and individuality, binding them forever to a government that did not value their voices or respect their rights. For Adams, independence was not just an aspiration, it was a necessity, a step that must be taken to protect the ideals of liberty that had begun to take root in the colonies. The debates that followed were fierce and unrelenting, with words wielded as weapons in the battleground of ideas. In the cramped and stifling room of the Pennsylvania State House, passions ran high as delegates argued over the future of the colonies. Each day brought new voices, new arguments, and new tensions. Some days the hall rang with fiery exchanges, voices raised and tempers flaring as opposing views clashed in open confrontation. Other days the room was steeped in a tense silence, each delegate deep in thought, weighing the enormity of the decisions before them. The stakes were palpable, the consequences of each choice profound. These were men accustomed to debate and disagreement, but they had never before faced a question of such monumental significance. To seek peace and remain subjects, or to risk war for the chance of freedom. The intensity of these discussions reached new heights when news arrived that would change the course of history. Word spread through the Congress that King George III had not only dismissed the Olive Branch Petition, but had issued a proclamation declaring the colonies in open and avowed rebellion. The Olive Branch Petition, the final plea for reconciliation, had been cast aside, its earnest appeal ignored. The King's declaration was, to many, the final, unyielding blow. For the delegates who had still held hope for a peaceful resolution, this was a sobering revelation. It was a stark message from the Crown. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no understanding. The King had made up his mind. He saw the colonies as rebels to be subdued, not subjects to be appeased. For Congress, the King's proclamation marked a turning point. The hopes of reconciliation that had lingered, however faintly, now seemed naive, even futile. In the face of such unyielding opposition, the delegates realised that peace under British rule was no longer an option. Reconciliation was, at best, a fantasy, at worst, a trap that would lead to further subjugation. The balance of opinion shifted sharply, as even those who had once advocated patience and diplomacy began to see that the only way forward might indeed captured the frustrations and dreams of ordinary Americans in a way few others could. "Society in every state is a blessing," he wrote, "but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil." These were powerful words that resonated deeply with colonists who were tired of feeling oppressed and ignored. Common Sense wasn't merely a pamphlet. It was a call to arms, a rallying cry that transformed whispers of independence into a shout that could no longer be ignored. Against this backdrop, the Congress took steps that would cement its role as the beating heart of the revolutionary cause. Among its first actions was the establishment of the Continental Army, a force to stand against Britain's seasoned redcoats. They appointed George Washington as Commander-in-Chief, a man of towering reputation and military experience who commanded respect. However, organising and equipping an army from scratch was no small feat, especially with limited funds and scant resources. The Congress wrestled with how to pay and supply the soldiers, struggling to unite the efforts of disparate colonies under one banner. Beyond the battlefield, the Congress recognised the importance of diplomacy. They understood that this war, should it persist, could not be won without allies. France, Britain's long-standing rival, became an obvious choice for support, and Congress began to lay the groundwork for future alliances. This marked the start of American diplomacy, as Congress members envisioned a time when their fledgling nation might stand as a respected equal on the world stage. Financial matters also loomed large. The Congress set about creating a unified currency, knowing that to sustain their cause, they would need a system to manage funds, debts, and resources. This too was a monumental challenge, requiring the colonies to share their resources and put collective needs above individual interests. It was an early taste of the unity that would one day define the United States. As the spring of 1776 dawned, the Congress had become a powerful force in its own right, a body through which the colonies spoke as one. Yet, as they prepared to take even bolder steps, one thing was clear. While the Congress represented the united colonies, it was the people within it who truly drove the movement. Figures like Adams, Dickinson, and Washington each embodied different facets of the revolutionary spirit. To fully understand this pivotal moment, we must look closer at the individuals whose courage, convictions, and sacrifices shaped the American fight for freedom. Let us now turn to these key figures in the independence movement. When we think of the Declaration of Independence, we think of bold words inked on parchment, a declaration that changed the course of history, but behind the words were real people, each with a vision, a voice, and a part to play in the independence movement. Among them, few shone brighter than Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams. Each of these men, in his own way, contributed to the birth of a nation and the spirit that still defines America. Thomas Jefferson, the young Virginian statesman, was the principal author of the Declaration. When Congress selected him for the daunting task, it was no accident. Jefferson was known for his eloquence and his firm commitment to the cause of liberty. In crafting the Declaration, wasn't just stringing together words. He was capturing the essence of a new world vision. His inspiration came from the Enlightenment, that era of revolutionary thought that challenged tradition and championed reason. John Locke's ideas on natural rights, the inherent rights to life, liberty, and property, echoed in Jefferson's mind as he wrote. Locke had argued that governments existed by the consent of the governed, a radical idea that defied the divine right of kings. Jefferson distilled Locke's philosophy into what would become the heartbeat of American values: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words were more than ideals. They were a promise to future generations. Jefferson dreamed of an America that would stand as a beacon of freedom, a land where people could govern themselves and aspire to their fullest potential. To him, independence wasn't just about breaking free from British rule. It was about creating a society built on equality and justice. Jefferson's draft of the Declaration was a blueprint for this vision, and it would soon resonate across continents, inspiring other nations to seek their own freedom. Then there was Benjamin Franklin, the seasoned diplomat and man of many talents. By the time of the Second Continental Congress, Franklin was already famous on both sides of the Atlantic as a scientist, inventor, and statesman. His reputation brought a level of respect and credibility to the Congress, bolstering its standing in the eyes of foreign powers. But Franklin's contribution to the independence movement wasn't merely in reputation. He had a gift for diplomacy and an understanding of human nature that few could match. He knew when to persuade, when to joke, and when to speak with gravity. When Jefferson submitted his draft of the Declaration, Franklin reviewed it carefully. He made edits that sharpened the language and clarified Jefferson's ideas, adding his own touch of wisdom to the document. He knew that the Declaration was not just a statement of intent, but a message to the world. Franklin's revisions emphasized the unity among the colonies, a unity that he knew would be tested in the long struggle ahead. He famously reminded his fellow delegates, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." This was more than a witticism, it was a stark reminder of the risk they were all taking. For Franklin, independence was not a path for the faint-hearted, but a shared journey that demanded sacrifice and solidarity. John Adams, the outspoken lawyer from Massachusetts, was perhaps the most relentless advocate for independence. From the earliest days of the Congress, Adams was unyielding in his belief that separation from Britain was the only way forward. He saw independence not as a choice, but as a necessity. Adams understood the risks and the costs, and he spoke of them candidly. "I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration," he admitted. "Yet through all the gloom, I can see the rays of ravishing light and glory." Adams knew that victory was uncertain and that the price of failure was death. Yet he also knew that the cause of freedom was worth every sacrifice. Adams was a master of persuasion. Where Franklin was skilled in diplomacy, Adams was fierce and unyielding, using his fiery speeches to rally support among hesitant delegates. legacy. It was their gift to the world, a testament to the courage of ordinary people standing up against oppression. In the end, the Declaration of Independence became more than a list of grievances or a political manifesto. It was a reflection of the dreams and struggles of a people who dared to believe in a world where liberty was a right, not a privilege. But before it could take its place in history, the Declaration needed to be crafted into its final form, a task that would demand both patience and precision. Let us now turn to the next chapter in this journey, the drafting of the Declaration, where these visions would be shaped into the immortal words we know today. The drafting of the Declaration of Independence was no simple task. It was a journey, a labour of ideas and ideals forged in the quiet determination of Thomas Jefferson. Working in seclusion, Jefferson wrestled with words that would carry the weight of an entire people's hope for freedom. He drew upon existing charters, Enlightenment philosophy, and the bitter experiences of the colonies under British rule. Late into the night, Jefferson penned line after line, pouring his convictions onto the page. The result was a draft that would capture both the grievances and the aspirations of the American spirit. Jefferson's initial draft was fiery and unfiltered. It was a bold declaration, not only calling for independence, but denouncing the injustices that had led to this breaking point. Among his strongest statements was an unyielding condemnation of the slave trade, a passage in which he accused the British Crown of waging cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty. In these lines, Jefferson acknowledged the brutal contradiction within colonial society, a society seeking liberty while also holding others in bondage. Yet, as the draft circulated among delegates, this powerful passage was met with resistance. To keep Southern support and maintain unity, the section was ultimately removed, leaving an unspoken wound in the nation's founding document. What remained, however, was a forceful articulation of colonial grievances, a list that unfolded like a legal case against the British king. Jefferson meticulously outlined complaints that the colonists had raised for years: unjust taxation, the restriction of trade, and the forced quartering of British troops in colonial homes. The Declaration detailed the ways in which King George III had undermined colonial self-governance, portraying him as a tyrant bent on subjugation. Jefferson's words painted a grim picture, framing the king as an oppressive force that had robbed the colonies of their rights. One grievance in particular struck a chord, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. It highlighted the very real and personal impact of British policies that infringed on fundamental rights and pushed the colonists to the edge of revolt. As the draft circulated among Congress, it underwent rigorous scrutiny. Jefferson's draft was bold, but it needed to resonate with every colony if it were to fulfill its purpose. The editing process became a collaborative effort, with John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and other prominent figures stepping in to refine Jefferson's words. They carefully removed phrases that were deemed too inflammatory or divisive, aware that even the smallest disagreement could threaten the fragile unity among the colonies. Franklin, ever the pragmatist, suggested changes to ensure the document was not only stirring but accessible to a broad audience. Together, these men crafted a final version that was succinct, powerful, and designed to inspire collective action. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress approved the revised Declaration of Independence. What had begun as Jefferson's passionate draft had transformed into a succinct statement of American principles, a testament to the shared beliefs that bound the colonies together. The document was a bold proclamation of rights, a declaration of a people who had decided they would no longer be subjects, but citizens. The journey of drafting the Declaration was complete, but the story was far from over. Now, this document would echo across the Atlantic, stirring hearts and provoking anger on both sides of the ocean, setting in motion a reaction that would shape the world. The ink on the Declaration of Independence was barely dry when the realities of war came crashing down on the newly declared United States. For the Continental Army, the path to independence was fraught with obstacles, and the early battles tested the resolve of every soldier, officer, and patriot supporter. Unlike the British forces, with their well-trained ranks and ample supplies, the Continental Army was, in many ways, a force held together by sheer willpower. Funds were scarce, weapons were often inadequate, and training was minimal. Young recruits faced the harsh realities of battle with little more than the determination to stand against the might of an empire. One of the first major clashes after the Declaration was the Battle of Long Island. Here, General George Washington and his troops faced a formidable British force, and the outcome was grim. Outmaneuvered and outnumbered, the Continental Army suffered a crushing defeat. British soldiers, seasoned and disciplined, pushed the Americans back, forcing Washington's men into a harrowing retreat. Yet, even in defeat, the resolve of the patriots remained unbroken. This was more than just a military struggle. It was a fight for the very ideas proclaimed in the Declaration. Each loss, every setback, became fuel for the cause, a reason to dig deeper and fight harder. In the face of overwhelming adversity, the Americans found a resilience that defied British expectations. The Declaration had a profound impact on morale. To the men in Washington's ranks, the document was more than a statement of independence. It was a symbol of the values they held dear. It gave purpose to their struggle, transforming a disparate group of colonies into a united front fighting for freedom. Thomas Paine captured the spirit of the moment in The American Crisis, writing, "These are the times that try men's souls." His words echoed across the fledgling nation, reminding soldiers and civilians alike of the stakes involved. The Declaration became a banner under which the patriots rallied, a reminder of the higher ideals for which they sacrificed. With each battle, the struggle became more than a question of survival. It became a mission to uphold the promise of liberty. This sense of purpose extended beyond the battlefield. Across the colonies, civilians took on essential roles in supporting the war effort. Communities came together to supply the soldiers with food, blankets, and ammunition, stretching their own resources to keep the continent farmers donated crops, blacksmiths repaired weapons, and women organised fundraisers to purchase supplies. These acts of support were not only practical but deeply symbolic, signalling that the fight for independence was a shared effort. The Declaration had united the colonies not only in principle but in action, bringing together people from all walks of life under a common cause. Yet, as the Americans fortified their commitment, British command miscalculated the depth of that resolve. Many British leaders saw the colonists as untrained rebels, convinced that with enough pressure they would quickly fold. The British underestimated not only the tactical ingenuity of American leaders like Washington, but also the power of the ideals that fueled the revolution. They believed that victory was simply a matter of quelling the rebellion with a show of force, a mistake that would cost them as the war wore on. Each British assault, rather than breaking American spirit, seemed to galvanise it further. The colonists were no longer just fighting to win battles. They were fighting to defend the freedoms outlined in the Declaration. For the patriots, the Declaration provided a moral compass, a clear line that divided liberty from oppression. It was a beacon that kept them focused, even in the darkest moments of the war. The British might have had superior forces, but the Americans had an unyielding commitment to their cause. Every hardship they faced, every victory or loss, became a testament to their dedication to independence. As the war continued, the American resolve only deepened, hardening into an unbreakable commitment to freedom. The battles fought in the wake of the Declaration tested the limits of American endurance, but the spirit of the revolution never wavered. The journey was far from over, and the battles yet to come would demand even greater sacrifice. Yet, with each passing day, the patriots grew closer to their dream of a free and independent nation. In the face of British might, they would need every ounce of courage they could muster, for the final chapters of the revolution were still to be written. The Declaration of Independence did not only ignite the American Revolution, it ignited a fire that would burn across the world, inspiring oppressed peoples in their own quests for liberty. Its words resonated far beyond the borders of the 13 colonies, finding their way into the hearts of revolutionaries in France, whose own fight for liberty would soon follow. In Haiti, enslaved people took up the call for freedom, drawing strength from the Declaration's promise of equality and self-governance. Over the centuries, this document became a beacon, symbolising the enduring human desire for freedom and dignity. It was more than a list of grievances against a king. It was a declaration of universal human rights, a cry for justice that would echo throughout history. As time passed, the Declaration of Independence became far more than a historical document. It emerged as a symbol of hope and resilience, a testament to the enduring power of words to inspire change. Initially a daring proclamation of rebellion, it transformed into an icon of freedom, a rallying cry for those who dared to believe in a fairer, more just society. The Declaration's vision that the right to self-determination and personal freedom is paramount transcended the events of 1776, becoming woven into the very fabric America's identity. Through every struggle, from the abolition of slavery to the civil rights movement, the Declaration's message has remained steadfast, that all people are created equal, with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In every era, those words have rekindled hope and resolve, inspiring generations who sought to expand the promise of freedom to all. But the Declaration did more than rally the colonies to a common cause. It established the ideological bedrock upon which a nation would be built. Its principles were not just calls to arms, but timeless values that would form the foundation of the American identity. With each line, the Declaration spoke to the colonies' desire not merely to separate from Britain, but to forge a bold vision of self-governance and human rights. Its words suggested a revolutionary concept, that government should be accountable to its people, drawing its legitimacy from the consent of the governed. Gone were the days of rule by divine right or hereditary privilege. In America, authority would be grounded in the collective will of the people. This powerful vision would come to define American democracy, reverberating through centuries and shaping a society based on principles of representation, equality, and justice. The Declaration's principles of equality, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were nothing short of groundbreaking. They directly challenged centuries-old norms of governance and societal hierarchy, defying the traditional structures that place power and privilege in the hands of a select few. Instead, the Declaration articulated a new way of thinking, one that affirmed the inherent worth and rights of every individual. It proclaimed that freedom was not a privilege reserved for the elite, but a universal right belonging to all. This vision of a society governed by laws rather than by the whims of kings was revolutionary, setting a standard that would shape not only the United States, but democratic aspirations around the world. For the young nation, these ideals served as a guiding star, helping forge a sense of unity and purpose among a diverse and often divided population. America would become a land of immigrants, a place where people from all walks of life and myriad cultures would come together under a shared belief in freedom and opportunity. Despite the nation's many divisions, the Declaration offered a vision of what America could be, a society where justice and opportunity were not the privileges of a few, but the rights of all. A land held together not by bloodline or geography, but by a shared commitment to self-governance and equality. Yet, the path to achieving this vision was fraught with obstacles. The fledgling United States faced monumental challenges, both on the battlefield and within its borders. Its military was untrained and often undersupplied, its alliances uncertain, and its government still evolving. It was a nation in its infancy, vulnerable and untested, fighting not only for independence, but for survival. The lofty ideals of the Declaration would be tested at every turn, as Americans grappled with the practical realities of building a new country. There were times when the dream of freedom seemed like a distant mirage, when the cost of independence felt insurmountable. devastating defeats and bitter internal divisions. But even in the darkest of times, the Declaration's words echoed in the minds and hearts of the people, reminding them of the shared purpose they were fighting for. The Declaration became more than a document. It was a binding promise to themselves and to future generations. It symbolized a commitment to strive toward a nation built on justice, equality, and self-governance, even when those ideals felt beyond reach. This collective commitment bound Americans together, reinforcing the sense of shared destiny that held the nation through its most trying moments. It offered hope, resilience, and a vision that gave meaning to their sacrifices. As they faced countless struggles to secure and maintain their independence, the Declaration stood as a constant reminder of what they were striving to achieve: a nation where all were free to pursue happiness, where laws were created by and for the people. John Adams captured the spirit of this revolution in a single line. The revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people. To Adams and his contemporaries, the real revolution was not merely in the battles fought or the territories gained. It was the awakening of a new consciousness, one in which ordinary individuals saw themselves as agents of their own fate. The Declaration's true power lay not only in its words, but in the belief it stirred across the colonies, a belief that ordinary people had the right and the ability to shape their own destiny. This was the heart of the American Revolution, the transformation of individuals from subjects to citizens, empowered by the notion that they held the reins of their own future. No longer passive recipients of decrees, Americans were now participants in a grand experiment of self-governance. This transformation was the real legacy of the Declaration. It sparked a revolution, not just of independence, but of identity, where people began to see themselves as equals, capable of building a society based on shared values rather than imposed rule. It was this spirit that would carry Americans forward through every subsequent struggle and challenge, from the hardships of the Revolutionary War to the debates over the Constitution and beyond. The Declaration's ideals would serve as a touchstone, guiding the nation as it evolved and adapted, forever grounded in the belief that freedom, equality, and self-determination were worth any sacrifice. The promise of the Declaration endured, offering hope and inspiration to future generations, a vision of what America could and should be. As I close this chapter on the Declaration's legacy, I'm reminded that the story of American independence is far from over. The struggle for liberty and equality continued long after 1776, as the young nation faced the trials of self-governance and the weight of its ideals. In the next episode, I'll dive into the struggles and strategies of 1776 and 1777, pivotal years where the fate of the revolution hung in the balance. From battles on the front lines to the challenges of keeping a fledgling nation united, I'll explore how the American fight for independence evolved, setting the stage for the birth of a nation. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please consider subscribing to ASMR History. By subscribing, you won't miss a single chapter as we uncover the people, events, Stay tuned.